Hi everyone, welcome to another reflection vlog at Wool and Spinning. My name is Rachel. I can be found pretty much everywhere as Wool and Spinning. It is a pleasure to be here with you today, and thank you so much for tuning in and for spending some time here. Everybody's time is so thinly spread. And I just want to thank you for choosing this video, choosing this channel, to take a minute to take a breath and listen to something or sort of engage in conversation with me, if you will, in this space, in this place. Today I wanted to talk about how I actually make decisions when I spin. I'm just going to look over at my notes here for a moment. So we're going to talk a little bit about what decision making really looks like. We're going to talk about where those decisions actually happen and what I don't rely on as much anymore, the things that I've let go of over time. And then some deeper insights about my process and the things that I do. So for the last few months, we talked about foundations and hand spinning. We spent the first 3 vlogs this year, talking about like what I believe and what I believe in my current hand spinning practice. What are the things that are working for me? And that's changed over the last 10 years, quite significantly actually. The fundamentals in my practice haven't really changed much from those very early days. And early on, I realized very, very quickly that some sort of intentional practice would be necessary to become the type of spinner that I wanted to be. And it had to be quiet. And at the time, it seemed like everything took forever. I felt like I spent a lot of time sitting at the wheel, trying to navigate what I wanted to learn, the projects that I was trying to create. I talked through a lot of my process on the podcast in those early episodes. Sometimes I felt rushed because I was trying to get to the next thing. And, I think over time, I just really realized that I had to slow down. Sorry about that. So my mom, because we're living with my mom right now, she has a landline still, and it's just so odd to me that this handheld, like physical phone, rings sometimes. It's quite odd. Anyways, we're so used to doing everything with cell phones now, aren't we? For those of you who still have landlines and still have physical phone that's like connected to said landline, there is a simplicity to that I really appreciate. So I think in general, what I've sort of learned over the last 10 years and why I've come to this place is I think many of us sort of assume that decisions happen all at once, that we sort of have this moment of inspiration, I'm going to make that, and all of the decisions are just magically made because we've decided to make this thing. Or we've stumbled across something and there sort of almost looks like from the outside, I know I used to feel like this when I was around really experienced makers, it almost seemed like all of their decisions had already been made, that, I'm going to make X, Y, Z. And then you would ask them, how are you going to go about doing that? And it sometimes felt, from my perspective, like they'd already mapped it all out and they already knew exactly what they were going to do. And I think in reality, what actually happens, and I've definitely learned this as I've become more experienced, is that most of my choices are very small, they're very quiet, and they're very cumulative. So over time, as I work my way through a process, those choices in the process happen. They don't necessarily happen at the outset. I've got a project right now that I'm just in the process of starting, and I need a new spinning project, like I need another hole in my head. But I just have been so called to this project, and I really, want to start it. It would be a total palette cleanser, something really just for me. And I'm craving that right now, and I'm craving that simplicity right now, but there's all these decisions that I need to make about how to begin. And I've just kind of allowed them to be there. I have a feeling that I kind of know what direction I'm going to go in with this spin, but I'm not certain. And I'm okay with that, because these sort of small decisions happen as we delve into the project and as we allow ourselves to be pinned down about, what the next step is going to be. So what does this decision making really look like? What does it actually look like in practice. So many of my decisions are responses. They're not plans. It's something that's been put in front of me, and I sort of start to think about what I maybe want to create, what I maybe want to begin to think about. What are the fiber tools that I want to engage with? Am I feeling called to my combs? I very rarely feel called to my combs. Do I maybe want to pull out my drum carder? Do I want to pull out my big drum carder? And so it's really listening to myself, my intuition. What do I want to work on right now? What am I called to? What feels comfortable? What feels like it would be a struggle? And letting those early choices stay provisional. So, allowing them to pivot, allowing myself to change. Maybe I started off with a project with something in mind, and then I just think, I'm not sure that's the right choice now that I'm into it, now that I'm actually pulling the fiber out, whether it's, washed and prepped fleece, or it's some roving, or it's a comb top, now that it's actually in front of me, do those decisions really feel like that's the right thing to do? And I think that's where that ability to remain flexible and to be able to pivot is really important, because often those decisions, if they're so rote and they're, it's sort of like committing pen to paper, if it's like rules and you've mapped out this whole plan, and what happens when the plan doesn't work? This is something that I've carried with me from nursing for eons. I learned very early in my nursing career, I was still a student, that no matter what you had written down on your notes for the day, and no matter what you had as your plan for the day, your plan, I hold that term, that word very loosely. It would only take one little thing, one tiny little thing to happen. A blood work result, an assessment finding, when you first go in to see your patient, something minute, something really, really, really small, and all of a sudden your day is like completely thrown off, and you're having the day that you never thought you would have. You're going on road trips, and you're taking your patient down to diagnostics, and you're doing blood work that you didn't think that you were going to have to do right away, and things are being rushed, and there's a stat this and a stat that, and you've got to make sure that you're talking to so and so because such and such consultant's going to be coming, and the dressing needs to be exposed, and all of a sudden you're having a day that is not at all what you planned. And I think with our making and with our fiber, hopefully it's not stat, and hopefully it's not an emergency or even anything urgent. But it's important that some of our initial plans and our initial planning is held very loosely, because sometimes those early choices that we make and we think that that's the way to go ends up really not working at all. So where the decisions actually happen for me is usually in my hands. It's usually once I start working with the fiber. It doesn't really happen in my head. I might have a loose idea in my head of what's going on, but it's really once I start touching the fiber, feeling, if there's any resistance in the fiber to how I'm planning to prep it. I had that big spin a couple of summers ago that as soon as I started working with the fiber, I realized it needed to be rescoured. And that really changed the rhythm of the whole project, because I thought that I was going to have this quick fiber prep and then I was going to get onto the spinning really relatively quickly, and everything just came to a grinding halt because I had to rescour. I needed to wait for some good weather, make sure that I could get it done that day when it was warm and I could get it dry really quickly. So over time, that information about how this project's going to unfold becomes revealed. I don't rely on rigid plans as much as I used to, as I've just spoken about. That ability to pivot is definitely a superpower. Being able to change direction and change plans really quickly is a superpower. It's something we have to cultivate. It's something we have to practice. One of the things that my husband and I often talk about is his ability to change and to change direction is a little bit more blunted than mine. He finds it more challenging than I do, and it's something that we've talked about over time, because I'm just so easily, I just go, oh, we're going left instead of right, no problem, let's go. And he's sort of like, oh no, wait a second, like, why can't we go right anymore? Like, what do you mean we can't go right and we have to go left? And he has to process it a little bit more. So because I'm able to do that, I don't rely on sort of making a lot of notes anymore, or keeping a rigid plan of how I'm going to do something. Being able to recognize that you maybe need to rescour something, maybe you need to Maybe you thought that you weren't going to have to do as much prep as you do. Maybe you thought this comb top was going to be unbraid it, strip it down a few times and start spinning, and then you start to unbraid it and you realize it's really compacted and it needs a good steam or it needs a good soak. Okay, what does that look like? So I really try to hold those plans very, very loosely. The other thing that I really try to let go of is over preparing for outcomes. So this yarn is going to look like this, it's going to behave like this, and it's going to act like this, and everything is going to be grand. Half the time, that's just not the case. Yarn and fiber and wool does have a mind of its own. It's an organic material. It's something that changes based on humidity, the time of year, how it's been stored, where it came from, how it was washed, how it was finished, how it was spun, how it was prepared. Like all of these things impact that final yarn. And when you over prepare for this perfect outcome, that this perfect yarn is going to exist at the end and you're going to make this perfect sweater and it's going to be amazing. The reality is that you're setting yourself up for disappointment. And I always, one of the things that we always say to the kids is, expectations are planned disappointments. And it just happens so often. There's so many things in our making that we can't control the outcome. Maybe something goes sideways halfway through and we don't get it done when we thought that we would get it done, or it takes way longer. That usually is what happens. Things take way longer than we think it's going to take. But if you're really married to this idea that you're going to wear this shawl to this event on this date and you've only got 2 weeks, you're probably setting yourself up for disappointment. And then the other thing that I think that I used to really cling to, and I've really been able to let go of, is forcing alignment between an idea and the materials. And this comes up again and again when, like, say, for me anyways, when I'm trying to marry hand spun yarn to a weaving project. I think often I've got this idea in my head of what I want how I want the two to come together and what I want to create. And so far I've had very little success with that. Part of it is, hand spun, hand woven fabric acts differently. While I have really good sewing skills and I'm very, I'm a good sewer. I grew up knowing how to sew. My mom's a beautiful sewist. Working with our hand spun, hand woven fabrics is very different. So sometimes, like, what we have is the idea and what we think we're going to create and what we think is a great idea, especially if we're really rigid about that idea and we want that specific idea and we're kind of married to it, if you will. But if our materials don't match and our materials aren't going to work no matter what we do, you're going to have resistance at every turn, and you're going to, those decisions that you made at the beginning, ends up just, forcing these two things together, and it's just going to result in disappointment. So I've really tried to let go of a lot of that. And if I have a plan at the outset to weave with my hand spun, I really try to do as much sampling as is realistic. Sometimes it's not realistic to sample absolutely everything, but I do try to do as much sampling as I possibly can. And more on that as the year unfolds, because I do have a project right now that I'm spinning for that will be hand woven fabric, and I think I'm approaching that project very lightly and very gently, and I will be doing some sampling and whatnot, and I'm really excited about it. I'm looking forward to exploring that in more depth. So one of the things I think that's really evolved and changed for me over time, and is something that I really appreciate now, that more so than I did when I first started out, particularly when I first started out with the podcast, because I had so much to learn, is that understanding decision making as a relationship, and it's not about control. You can't control every aspect of the process. You can't always control yourself and the time that you have, or your patience, or your energy levels, your health. And I think as I've learned to allow those decisions to happen, and allowing myself to be a part of that process rather than holding the two separate, that this decision somehow happens over here and it's separate from myself, that it just ends up not allowing me to be deep enough in the process. And if it means that things happen more slowly, there's fewer projects that get finished, and there's fewer things that that I'm working on at any one time because a project takes more of my focus and more of my intention, that's okay. I'm okay with that now. Whereas a few years ago, I'm not sure that I was as not settled, but as content with that. Like I think there was a little bit of what's that word, when when you feel that the process is sort of, there's like there's a word I'm looking for. I'm sure some of you are yelling at this right now, saying it's blah blah blah, and you know exactly what I'm looking for. But that like it's incongruous, there's that incongruencies within the project, and it just doesn't feel like everything's just flowing, and for me, it's not realistic to always kind of get into that flow state. I don't very often get into that flow state. It takes a long time for me to fall into a flow state, but I think it's because my attention is always being dragged in many different directions. I'm constantly being interrupted. I don't have a dedicated studio, all those kind of things that I it's just fact. I don't feel one way or the, I feel quite neutral toward it actually, but it would be nice to be able to fall into that flow state. But when you're feeling those when you're not feeling like you have that feeling of settled, feeling settled about the decisions that you're making, and feeling like you're making them in partnership with your project, and you start to feel sort of like you're knocking heads all the time, that's that seeking control over and seeking to manage and seeking to have your finger in every single part of the process. And for me, sometimes it's actually better for me just to kind of step back a little bit and be like, hey, what's the fiber trying to say? What's this fiber prep tool like? Why isn't this working? Like what's off here? There's probably something that I'm missing, that I'm not taking the time to understand and learn and slow down and really listen to what's happening and what's going on. Usually it's because I'm like pushing through on something and I'm trying to force a round peg into a square hole. And we all know when that starts to happen, that there's just that that angst in a project that just until I can let go of that, I know that I'm not going to really enjoy the project. And because of that, it means that we have to learn to live with uncertainty, and that uncertainty often becomes a feature of our project, not a flow. So what I mean by that is that within a project, often I feel, particularly when I hit about the halfway mark, usually about a third of the way through, third to halfway, I start to kind of think, oh, I'm not sure this is what I was going for. I'm not sure this is exactly what I was hoping to create or hoping to do. And there's that sort of tension in there that holds me back from being able to like just fall into a total flow state and just kind of zone out and just be in the moment and be with that creative state and that creative flow state. And it's because of that uncertainty of like, just working through the process and working through what it is that I have to work through to get to the other side and to get to a project that is what I envisioned. And the more we do this, and the more that we engage in these big projects, and the more that we take the time to go through this process again and again. And it doesn't have to be from raw fleece. It can be from, the braided comb top. It can be from the roving. It can be from the pre-processed stuff. There doesn't need to be any fiber prep whatsoever. It's just that for me, often there is fiber prep involved, but it doesn't always have to. But as we go through this process again and again, no matter how big or how small, it can be a little mound of carded roving, or it can be a 4-ounce braid of comb top, or it can be 800 grams of fiber. Like it doesn't matter the size of the project, but the more that we go through this and the more that we do this, the more that trust is built in the process, and that trust is built in the decision making that we engage in as the process unfolds. And I think that's the piece that I had to learn. was that the more I did this and the more decisions that I made and the more I listened to what was happening in my process and with the fibers, the tools, whether it was, the fiber prep tools, the spindles, the wheel, plying, all of our finishing and post production, if you will, of our yarns, the more that you trust the process and the more that you trust your own knowledge and you trust your intuition because you've tried something and it worked out, or you tried something and it didn't and you learned. And I think over time, that's what really changed my decision making when I'm spinning, is learning to really trust the process and learning to put in those bits of learning that you pick up along the way and slowly embed it into what you're doing. If you're curious about joining the woolen spinning community and you're wondering where to begin, I've written a very simple start here guide. It is linked directly down below in the down bar. We would love to welcome you into our community. To those who have been long-term community members and keep the lights on here and help me to continue to do the work, thank you from the bottom of my toes, because from the bottom of my heart is not deep enough. I want to wish you all a very, very wonderful April, no matter where you are and what you are celebrating. If you've got a long weekend this month, we've got Easter coming up. Whatever your traditions are, wherever you are, I hope that you are enjoying the month. And what's the saying? April showers bring May flowers. We always have a very wet early spring here. So bring your rain jackets, bring your galoshes and your umbrellas, because you will probably need them if you are visiting the Pacific Northwest. And until May, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for reflecting back to me your thoughts about your process, what resonates, what doesn't resonate, what have I not talked about that you thought of. I would love to hear from you, and please comment down below. I do read each and every comment, and it often informs how I approach things the next month, because I read your thoughts and I think about them, and then they become part of the next vlog. So thank you so much for sharing. If you are on the Slack channel and you are part of the woolen spinning community, don't forget to share your thoughts around all of this stuff in the #podcast chat channel on Slack. Until May, I will see you guys soon. Take care, everybody. Keep warm and make lots of things. Bye.